Jesus is doing ministry, and the parents of a bunch of kids bring the kids to Jesus, and they ask Jesus to bless them, which is what it means by Jesus placing a hand on them and saying a prayer over them. In verse 14, though, we find out that the disciples are keeping the kids away from Jesus, and Jesus felt indignant. Now, everyone say indignant wherever you're watching from. That's an old school word, and it means to be angry or upset or mad. You see, Jesus was mad that the disciples were keeping the children from him. The reason why was because it was very common practice in Jesus' day for rabbis, which Jesus was a Jewish rabbi, to bless children, much like what we do in our churches today of a child dedication. And when a rabbi would bless a child, they would lay their hand on top of their head, on their hair, and say a prayer to God, asking God to bless them. Now, there are two Hebrew words that kind of dominate the Bible about blessing. The first is asher, and the second is baraka. And both of these ideas of blessing carry with it this idea that God will give us a sense of well-being that comes when we live in tune and rightly with God. That's blessing. In the New Testament, being blessed has nothing to do with superficial success that can often lead to a smug, self-righteous pride. To be blessed in the New Testament has to do with being fully satisfied by faith in God, no matter your circumstances. Blessing describes what God does in us, in our life. It doesn't have to do with us and God. It has to do with what God does in us. Blessing is that he pours his love and his life out for us. He shares his goodness to meet our needs. He empties himself among us, and we understand more fully who he is. That's blessing. This means that anyone in pain or suffering can be blessed because despite outward, humble circumstances, they feel God's favor and his love filling them. And rabbis would bless children, and they would have a specific blessing for the little boys and girls. For the boys, they gave them the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. Ephraim and Manasseh were the two sons of Joseph from the Old Testament. And this might seem kind of like a strange blessing. Like, why don't we bless the children with the blessing of David or Moses or Elijah? Why Ephraim and Manasseh? Well, according to Jewish scholars, they would bless them with Ephraim and Manasseh because these two brothers were the first pair of brothers in the Bible who did not see each other as competitors. They did not struggle for power, and their family never seemed to be a source of great difficulty in their lives. And in essence, rabbis would bless little boys with humility, with peace, with harmony. The little girls would equally be blessed with a blessing of Sarah and Rebekah and Leah, who were all women in the Old Testament of great and strong faith. To be blessed with that blessing meant that they were blessing little girls to walk in the strength of faith with God their whole life. And parents wanted Jesus to bless their children in this way, but the disciples rejected them. How come? Why did the disciples push the children away from Jesus, Rabbi Jesus? Well, children in the first century had very little social importance and civil rights. And to the disciples, the children offered very little social status to Jesus. You see, they weren't religious leaders who had a clout that could help advance their mission. They weren't business people who had a lot of wealth that could support their ministry. They were just children who had very little social importance and practical value, and so they pushed them away, hoping to move to more important matters. And Jesus sees this, and he's upset. And he uses it to teach an important truth about kingdom and humility and the Christian life. He says in verse 14, "Let them come to me. For the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." Now, you might recognize this passage. Maybe it's on the wall, on a frame in your bedroom with a picture of your grandkids, or maybe it's on a poster or a piece of artwork from Etsy in your kid's bedroom. We've all heard this passage before, most likely. What does it mean? What is Jesus saying? Well, Jesus is using a metaphor here. What is he getting at? You see, when Jesus says that the kingdom of God belongs to children, he means that just like a child wasn't considered socially important and had very few rights, so the only way to enter God's kingdom is to give up our self-importance and our rights. Children, as you know, are utterly dependent, and they must trust their parents to provide and care for them. And so Jesus is making a radical statement about humility and to be his disciple and his follower. To be a follower of Jesus, to be his disciple, means that we abandon any sense of self-importance that we carry, any rights and entitlements, and we trust in him as if we were a child. You want to be humble? Does this sound good to you? I hope so. I know it's hard, but if you want to be humble, it begins with surrendering our self-importance and our rights to depend completely on Jesus.